The scream of sirens wasn't what shook him first. It was the way the officers looked at him, like he'd already been convicted of something he didn't even understand. One moment, he was standing on the quiet riverfront land he'd inherited, sketching out the dreams his grandfather once whispered to him. The next, he was surrounded, floodlights washing over him as if he were a threat, a danger, an intruder in a place that had been his family's home for generations. He hadn't broken a single law. He hadn't harmed a single soul. All he'd done was exist in a space. Someone else decided he didn't belong. And in that split second, the land he thought would bring peace became a battlefield he never asked for. Neighbors who never spoke to him suddenly had opinions about where he should stand, where he should walk, what he was allowed to build. They didn't see the deeds or the history. They saw the color of his skin and assumed the rest. The whispers became complaints. The complaints became calls. And the calls turned into armed officers rolling up with sirens blazing, ready to accuse first and ask questions later. He stood alone in the glare of police lights, holding documents that proved everything: his ownership, his rights, his history. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was a false report someone made about him, a lie weaponized by someone who thought their authority outweighed his humanity, a lie that escalated into something dangerous, something that could have changed the course of his life forever. And as he stood there, heart pounding, surrounded by officers who approached with caution they should never have needed, he realized this wasn't just about property. It was about perception, about prejudice, about the way one person's bias could become another person's nightmare in the blink of an eye. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The accusations, the harassment, the quiet battles fought in shadows. Everything that followed would reveal a truth far uglier than he imagined. Because sometimes the biggest threat isn't the police lights flashing in the dark. Sometimes it's the neighbor who thinks they have the right to decide who you're allowed to be. But what happened after that night would shake the entire community and expose a truth they could no longer ignore. If he had known what awaited him next, he might have walked away from the riverfront that night. But it was already far too late. He had always imagined the riverfront as a place of healing, a quiet stretch of land where his grandfather once taught him how to skip stones and listen to the wind move through the pines. After years of long shifts in city noise, he finally returned to the place that felt like home, ready to build a cabin he'd dreamed of since childhood. To him, it wasn't just a project. It was a legacy, a promise kept, a chance to breathe again. Most mornings were peaceful. He arrived early, coffee in hand, greeting the sunrise as it reflected over the water. He worked with a sense of purpose, measuring beams, clearing brush, imagining the life he would create here. The land had always been his, documented, surveyed, and passed through generations of his family. He never questioned whether he belonged, until someone else decided he didn't. It started small, glances from passing neighbors, the kind that lingered a little too long, then slowed cars, hovering near the edge of his property. He told himself it was curiosity. People liked to look. New construction always drew attention. But there was something different about these stairs. Something colder. Something that made his stomach tighten, even when nothing had been said out loud. Soon, the murmurs began. Strangers claiming he wasn't supposed to be there. People insisting the land didn't belong to him. It didn't matter how many times he explained the history or showed the paperwork. To them, he was an outsider on land his family had tended for generations. He tried to shrug it off, focusing on his work, believing the tension would fade. But every day, the hostility grew sharper, heavier, harder to ignore. And though he didn't know it yet, the quiet unease creeping into his mornings was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because the moment someone picked up the phone to report him, everything would spiral in ways he never saw coming. The tension didn't erupt all at once. It crept in slowly, tightening around him day by day until it was impossible to ignore. At first, it was just one woman from a neighboring community standing at the edge of the tree line, arms folded, watching him like he was trespassing on sacred ground. Her eyes tracked his every move, lingering not on the tools he carried, but on the man himself, as if his presence alone was the threat. Then more neighbors appeared. Some took pictures from a distance, pretending they were documenting construction concerns. Others whispered openly, voices carrying across the water with just enough venom to make their intentions clear. They questioned whether he had a right to be there, whether he really owned the land, whether someone like him could possibly be building something legitimate. Still, he kept working, because this was his family's land, his history, his future, the place where generations had lived, loved, and dreamed. He refused to let their stares steal that from him. But the resistance didn't stay quiet. The first confrontation came on a morning when fog still hugged the shoreline. He was unloading lumber from his truck when a group approached. For residents, led by the woman who'd been watching him from day one. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply informed him that the community didn't approve of what he was doing. No mention of permits, property lines, or regulations. Just a thinly veiled warning that he shouldn't be there at all. He explained calmly, showing documents that prove his ownership. They didn't look. They didn't care. Their expression said everything. They had already decided who he was. Word spread quickly. Soon, he found handwritten notes on his truck. This land isn't for you. Leave before things get worse. We will protect our neighborhood. The language was vague enough to sound polite, but sharp enough to raise goosebumps along his arms. The more he ignored it, the bolder it became. The trespassing started next. Footprints where they shouldn't be. Camera flashes in the dark. People stepping onto his land under the excuse of checking community easements. That didn't exist. Every time he confronted them, they played innocent. Offended even, acting as if it was he who needed to explain why he was defending property that legally belonged to him. Then came the day he arrived to find a sign hammered into his ground. Private property. Community access only. A message meant to erase him completely. He pulled the sign out, heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. And that's when he noticed a neighbor across the path raising her phone, recording him like she'd just caught a criminal in the act. A smile played on her lips, the kind that told him everything. She wasn't documenting wrongdoing. She was building a case based on nothing but prejudice. And somewhere deep in his gut, dread coiled tighter. Because if she was willing to twist the narrative this far, he knew what would come next. Someone was going to make a phone call. Someone was going to lie. And in a world where assumptions could be deadly, he knew exactly how bad it could get. But he had no idea just how far they would push it or how quickly everything would explode when authorities arrived. The morning it all erupted felt wrong, before anything even happened. The air was too still, the lake too quiet, the path too empty. He felt it in his chest, a heaviness he couldn't name, as he walked toward a half-built cabin, tools in hand, ready for another long day of work. But before he could take 10 steps, the sound of engines roared through the trees. 3 police cars tore down the dirt road, tires spitting gravel, lights flashing so brightly they painted the entire shoreline in violent colors. For a split second, he thought they were searching for someone else, someone dangerous, someone who actually needed to be confronted by law enforcement. But then they skidded to a halt in front of him. Doors flew open. Officers stepped out with urgency, hands hovering near weapons, posture rigid and alert. They were approaching him, the man holding nothing but a water bottle and a bundle of construction plans. And just behind them, stepping out her SUV like she had orchestrated a military operation, was the same neighbor who had been watching him for weeks, the one who'd recorded him with that triumphant smile. Her face now twisted with manufactured fear. She pointed straight at him. "That's him," she shouted. "He's trespassing. He threatened us. He's trying to take over community property." Every word was a lie, but it carried the weight of truth because of who said it and who she said it about. He tried to speak, but an officer's command cut him off. "Sir, keep your hands visible. Do not reach for anything." His breath locked inside his chest. The world narrowed to the harsh glare of floodlights and the trembling beat of his heart. He raised his hand slowly, fingers spread wide, feeling the injustice hit him harder than any physical blow could. This was his land, his family's land. And yet here he stood, treated like a criminal on the soil his grandfather once walked with pride. One officer moved closer, eyes never leaving his hands. Another circled behind him as if expecting him to run. The neighbor continued her performance. Tears she didn't feel streaking down her face as she repeated her lies. each one more outrageous than the last. He's dangerous. He told us he'd burn down our homes. He's not supposed to be here. He felt his stomach twist, nausea rolling through him. The officers exchanged glances, cautious, uncertain, evaluating him through a lens he could never remove, one shaped by generations of bias and fear. He swallowed hard and forced his voice to remain steady. I haven't done anything wrong. This is my property. I have documents. Sir, an officer warned, don't reach for anything. He froze. Every instinct screamed that one wrong move could change everything, could turn this from a misunderstanding into a tragedy. He had seen it happen before, to people who looked like him, who were guilty of nothing but existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this wasn't the wrong place. This was his place. His chest tightened painfully as the officer closest to him examined his face, searching for signs of danger that weren't there. Seconds dragged into an eternity. The pressure, the fear, the humiliation, it all pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. Finally, he managed to say, "My documents are in my truck. I'm not reaching for them, but they'll prove everything." For a tense beat, no one moved. Then the officer gestured to a colleague. "Check the truck." Slowly. The neighbor's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering behind her mask as she realized the situation wasn't unfolding the way she hoped. Her fear act cracked. Her eyes darted around. She whispered something under her breath. When the officer returned holding the folder, property deed, survey lines, water rights dating back nearly a century, the tension broke like a snapped wire. The officer's eyes widened. His posture softened. Shock flickered across his face. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward the neighbor, "these documents show this property belongs entirely to him." Her mouth fell open. "No, that's impossible. Our community owns." "Not according to this," he cut in. "You've been trespassing on his land. For years." Silence followed, heavy, damning, unforgettable. And for the first time, the power in the clearing shifted. But this moment, as intense as it was, wasn't the end. It was only the breaking point, the place where truth finally collided with lies, where fear gave way to fury, where everything that had been hidden began rising to the surface. Because what happened after this confrontation would change the entire community forever. Here is a rich, emotionally layered resolution and impact section crafted for an 8 to 12-minute YouTube storytelling video on racism, built to leave the audience thinking long after the screen goes dark. The truth is, the moment the incident was over, nothing felt over to him. On the surface, life continued. He went back to work, back to his routine, back to pretending everything was normal. But inside, a quiet heaviness followed him everywhere. It showed up in the way he hesitated before stepping outside, in the way he scanned every room before entering, in the way he practiced calm breathing before simply existing in public. The world hadn't changed, but the way he moved through it had. And as the days passed, he realized the deepest wound wasn't the humiliation or even the fear. It was a realization that the people who hurt him would go home that night untouched, unbothered, unchanged. For them, it was just another moment. For him, it was another memory he'd have to carry. Another reminder of the unspoken rules placed on him since birth. Stay small, stay careful, stay aware. Because a single misunderstanding, one wrong tone, one misplaced movement, could cost him everything. But something else grew in that space too. Something he didn't expect. Clarity. He began to understand that staying silent wouldn't protect him. It never had. So he started telling his story. First to a trusted friend, then to a community group, and eventually online. And with each retelling, he met others carrying stories just like his. People who knew that same sting, that same fear, that same exhaustion. His story wasn't an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern, woven through generations, repeated in countless lives, ignored by far too many. The impact reached deeper than he imagined. When he spoke out, some people dismissed him, some minimized his experience. But others finally opened their eyes. A few reached out with support, and even fewer admitted that they had never realized how often these moments happen. And slowly, very slowly, conversations began to shift. Not perfectly, not universally, but enough to make him believe that change, even in its smallest form, still matters. Because that's how change starts. Not with a grand gesture, but with a story brave enough to be told and a listener willing to hear it. Yet the bigger truth remains. No one should have to be brave just to exist. No one should carry trauma simply because someone else chose ignorance over humanity. And no one should have to explain, again and again, why their pain is real. As he looked back on that moment, he understood something heavy, yet empowering. The world may not transform overnight, but silence guarantees it never will. His voice alone wouldn't fix the system, but it could light a spark in someone else. It could remind people that these incidents aren't just stories for entertainment or shock value. They are lived experiences, raw, painful, and ongoing. And maybe that's the part we should all sit with. Because if one story can shake us, what does it say about the reality some people face every day? If one incident feels unacceptable, how do we allow 1,000 more to continue without question? He survived that moment. He moved forward, but he refused to move on. And maybe we shouldn't either. Ask yourself, what will you do the next time you witness something like this? Stay silent? Or finally choose to stand on the right side of humanity? The answer to that question could be the beginning of real change.